Hi there! Thank you so much for tuning in to the Purple Pixie. My name is Crystal, and I want to welcome you to the Fairy Garden, aka my craft room. You'll see all kinds of things here, like DIYs and tutorials, home decor, trash to treasure, dupes, flips, makeovers, organizing, stash busting, tips, tricks, hacks, and even a recipe now and then. I also make my own craft supplies. Why? Because I'm on a budget that is so tight, even the piggy squeals when I reach for them. But let's face it, when was the last time you saw a pixie fairy with a job? Well, other than maybe a fairy godmother. But heck, with this economy, even that doesn't pay what it used to. But I always manage. And sometimes I make a little magic, but I also make some mishaps too. Either way, I always invite you to tell me what you think. So now, let me wave my wand and let's attempt some of that magic, shall we? Our project today is going to be a Plaid Decoupage spring tray. I love any and all colors, but as you can probably tell by my name, purple is my favorite. And what you can't tell by my name is that I also love plaid. So here we are with a plastic tray from Dollar Tree and some tissue paper. I'm going to attempt to cut the tissue paper into strips in order to make some decoupage plaid. And the reason I say attempt, well, you'll see. I totally went about this the hard way. I thought that if I folded the paper into pleats, it would be easier to cut the strips all the same width. What I didn't take into consideration is that each long edge of the strips would still have to be cut in order to make them all the same width. So I cut along the edge of the first pleat and everything came out beautiful. The strips were all the same width, and then I get to cut along the second pleat. That's when I realized that this was not going to work out as planned. I realized that each pleat had been folded on the other side as well, and would have to be cut there too. So if you're going to make strips out of tissue paper, I highly recommend just fold your paper and cut them in strips, but don't fold them in pleats like I did. And by the way, I ended up using about 12 strips of the purple and only one piece of the pink tissue paper. And now we're going to break out the Mod Podge. But before we do that, please make sure to put down a working mat on your surface. Heed this little bit of advice and you'll be thanking me later when you're not cleaning glue off of your table. So as you see here, I'm using the Mod Podge on the back side of the tray. And if you've ever seen these trays before, you'll know that the texture is also on the back side. So I'm going to make sure that I put enough glue on my stiff paintbrush, not sponge, to really make sure that the glue gets in between the little cracks and crevices of the texture. And the reason I recommend you use a stiff paintbrush for this rather than a sponge brush is so you'll have a little bit more control over pushing the tissue paper into those cracks and crevices as well, but you won't risk the chance of tearing it as bad. Once you have the strips laid down, go back over it with a generous amount of Mod Podge. But, as I said, be gentle or you risk tearing the tissue paper. Just like I did right there. But it's okay, it's an easy fix. Just take a small scrap of tissue paper and glue it right on. Be sure to get those edges and make sure you push that tissue paper into those grooves. Whoops, looks like I tore another piece. I may be a pixie fairy, but I'm anything but delicate. And now we're going to start laying our strips going the opposite direction. Once you lay the strip down, put another generous amount of Mod Podge on top. Be sure to use the paintbrush to, unlike me, gently push the paper into the texture. You can already see that where the strips overlap gives it that look of plaid. Just like paint, the more layers you put on, the darker it's going to get. So now that we have our foundation plaid laid, we're going to cover it with the pink tissue paper. The pink is going to fill in all of the empty gaps left between the purple strips. And since the back of our tray is already saturated with Mod Podge, we don't have to lay down another layer. Just put the pink tissue paper on top and then go over that with a layer of Mod Podge. But once again, make sure you get into all those cracks, crevices, and all around the edge. After all, you don't want all your hard work to peel up, do you? And by the way, don't worry about the tissue paper wrinkling. With all that texture on the tray, you're never going to notice it. Once it's all dry, and trust me, it does not take long to dry, you're going to cut around the edges and trim off the excess tissue paper. I didn't want to use sandpaper to trim off the excess because I didn't want to scratch up the edge of the tray. And now I realize that you can hardly see the pink tissue paper at all. So I'm going to take the rest of that piece and put another layer on. But here comes my first mishap of many in this project. Yep, I knocked over my whole jar of Mod Podge. Lucky for my clumsy butt though, I had my working mat down, was able to lift it up and pour most of it back in the jar. And then of course, I dropped the mat again, and it folded over on itself and made a little bit more of a mess. But that's okay because I was able to salvage most of it, and it's nothing I can't clean up with a nice wet rag. And before you know it, we're back in business. As you saw, that one piece of tissue paper isn't going to cover the entire tray. But that's okay because we have plans for the bottom part of the tray on the other side. But while we let this layer dry, let's move on to the bunny. I'm going to cut it out of foam core board because I want to decoupage this as well. So I googled free bunny printable and came across this one. So after saving it and printing it, I cut it out as best I could. Because not only can I not cut a straight line, I don't always do very well with cutting out curvy lines either. Go figure. That's why I have a silhouette machine. And in hindsight, I could have just cut out a bunny template with that, but for some reason I thought that printing it and cutting it out myself would be easier. I have no idea what I was thinking. But once I got the template cut out, I had to trace it onto the foam core board and cut it out again. When cutting shapes out of my foam core boards, or anything really, I like to butt it up to the edge as best I can to avoid wasting materials. And since I can never hold anything still long enough to trace it, I like to use a little bit of double-sided tape to hold it in place. I'm so envious of crafters I see on YouTube that can just lay down a template and trace it so easily with a permanent marker when I can't even do it with a pencil. And if you think my tracing skills are bad, you really don't want to see me try to cut this out with an X-Acto knife. So I'm going to spare you most of that. Just know it was not as easy as it sounds, thanks to all the curves, and at times I had to resort to using a sawing motion rather than a smooth cut. However, no blood was shed, just a little sweat and frustration, and that was coming from the bunny. I, on the other hand, got a headache from concentrating too hard and worried that I'd walk away with one less fingertip than I went into this with. Now, due to my crappy cutting skills, the bunny needed a bit of a trim. So I just used my scissors to cut off the big chunks. But when I got to the small cracks and crevices, I used a nail file. When you do this, be careful not to use too much pressure, because you can damage the paper on the foam core board by making it peel up. And also, you can end up distorting the shape if you file away too much of the details. Which I almost did, of course, because, as I said, I don't work very delicately. Next, I'm using this sheet music that I, once again, Googled and printed out. The reason it looks so distressed is because I crumpled it up and coffee stained it. I brewed a couple of cups of coffee and then poured it into a bowl because I'm going to crumple up my sheet music rather than lay it flat. If you need your paper to stay flat, you can use a baking sheet with a rim. The darker you want your paper to be, the longer you let it sit in the coffee. But usually 20 to 30 minutes is long enough. But for me, well, of course I forgot all about it and it sat overnight, which really ticked me off because when I woke up the next day, I realized I didn't reset my Keurig up to be ready to brew when I got to the kitchen. And my paper was so saturated, it tore a little when I took it out of the bowl, which is why it looks so damaged and torn up. So once my coffee was consumed, a couple of fresh cups, not the stuff in the bowl, and my paper had dried, I want to rip it into strips to decoupage the bunny. But I want the rips to be totally random, so I spritz the paper with a bit of water, and that allows me to tear it easier. Due to the fact that the paper was now so thin and saturated, it tore quite easily. So I had to be careful not to rip it to shreds, like I did my marriage certificate on the day my divorce was final. Come to think of it, my ex was pretty well coffee stained too. He was a truck driver, and those guys loved their coffee. He never had trouble sleeping though. Well, sleeping around, that is. So I guess you could say he has a lot in common with bunnies too. Just in case you're wondering how I can talk about my ex-husband like that, well, as far as I know, you can't get YouTube where he is. And I also know for sure that you can't get it where he's going. Okay, back to the bunny that didn't cheat on me. I wanted to try and decoupage each strip on him so that the words of the song could be read. So I originally didn't want the pieces to overlap too much, but I quickly realized that the strips were too wide to make that possible, so I just went with it. I started tearing the pieces into smaller pieces and just laying them wherever they would cover the whole bunny. I left some overhang though, so I could glue it to the back and cover the edges of the foam core board. And anywhere the paper overlapped, I made sure to put a little Mod Podge between them to ensure they stuck to each other and wouldn't peel up. And then of course I go over the entire thing with a good layer of Mod Podge. And here I'm cutting slits and the overhang so that we can wrap it around the foam core board and hide the edges. It gets a little messy here, but it's worth it. Once all the slits are cut, I put some Mod Podge on them, and then I'm just going to wrap them around the edges. And keep in mind when you're doing this yourself that the more you have overhanging, the easier it's going to be to wrap it. Get it? Wrap it? Wrap it? Ugh, I'm so good at these bad puns. And now I guess you could even say that this is a punny bunny. Come on, you know that was funny. In fact, why don't you try saying funny punny bunny 5 times real fast? Okay. Now that I'm finished wrapping my rabbit, I'm going to move back onto the tray. And of course, cut off the excess around the edges. Here I have some magazine pages that I ripped out of a magazine in my doctor's office. I didn't think she'd miss them because I never see her in the waiting room reading them. But boy, did her receptionist sure give me the stank eye. I'm just kidding. Somehow or another, I started receiving Better Home and Gardens magazines, and usually I just flip through them for pictures to use for my decoupage projects. So, whoever bought me a subscription to this magazine, as well as Martha Stewart's Living, thank you. But know that I don't read them. I just like the pictures. And once I decided on which pictures I was going to use, I again spritzed them with water. However, this time I forgot I had changed the nozzle on my sprayer from spritz to stream. I had to spray Felix from across the room because he kept wanting to play with our new pet. And speaking of which, I think it's about time for a fur baby break. If you've seen any of my previous videos, you may remember my two cats, Sweet Sydney and Fatty Felix. But today I'm introducing the newest member of the family. He's not very furry though. In fact, he's not furry at all. Introducing Van Gogh. He's a little baby snapping turtle that I actually found in my craft room. I have no idea where he came from or how he got in there. He literally came from out of nowhere like a ninja. So naturally, I thought I'd give him a name after one of the Ninja Turtles. But since my family's related to Van Gogh himself way down the line, it was only fair that he get a family name, right? Now, as you can probably tell by the looks of him, he isn't very soft, and he definitely doesn't like the cuddle. And he doesn't even like the paint or craft, which is odd considering where I found him. For the time being, he's doing okay in his little makeshift aquarium, but when he gets bigger, I'm going to release him back into the bayou where he belongs. Or I may just pull a total coon-ass move and make him into a stew. Hey, don't judge me. Y'all like farmhouse style, but what do you think they do on the farms? They breed their pets, raise them, and eat them. We just have different kinds of pets here in South Louisiana. Seriously though, I'm just kidding about the stew. Turtle's never been a meat that I care for. Lucky for Van Gogh, huh? By the way, do you know how hard it is to have a photo shoot with a turtle? You have to be really patient, because things don't go swimmingly. They go slowly. And there I go again with the bad puns. And hey, looking at the bunny right there, that gives me an idea. Maybe I should name this video The Tortoise and the Hare. Alright, getting back to the tray. If you recall, I spritzed the page with some water to make it a little easier for me to tear. But here's a little trick and tip for you. When you're decoupaging with thicker papers, spray them with just a little bit of water, and that'll help keep the wrinkles at bay when you smooth it out onto the glue. As long as you're careful and use a light hand, just as with any decoupage project, your paper will be smoother than it would have been if it were dry. Now, this tip doesn't work on tissue paper, however, because it's already too thin. Now, isn't it about time for me to make a few more mishaps? Well, of course it is. It wouldn't be a Purple Pixie project without them, right? You may have noticed that I forgot to tear off the bottom of the magazine page before I glued it down. But it was an easy fix once I caught it, because before it was dry, I just quickly cut it off. But then, I did the same thing with the other half of the picture. Not only that, but I even glued it onto the other piece. Thankfully, however, I was able to lift it up without it ripping all apart. And again, I was able to go in and cut off the edges of the page before it was too late. Then I added some more Mod Podge to this sucker to make sure it was good and down. rather than tearing, I'm going to cut these lavender flowers out. I don't want torn edges because I want it to blend into the field of flowers as though it was naturally there. Plus, cutting it allows me to get closer to the edges of the flowers and preserve some of the details. Here's another decoupage tip for you. Once you have your picture down on the surface and you start applying glue to the top, work your way from the center out. This helps ensure an even distribution of the glue, and it also helps cut down on the wrinkles. I really love to decoupage, and I have tons of tips and tricks for it, but those are going to have to wait until future videos. In the meanwhile, do you have any tips and tricks that you can share with us about decoupage? If so, please leave them in the comments section down below so all of my viewers can read them. Moving on, it's time to make a bow for our bunny. While my silhouette cameo is in the background cutting out a decal for the tray, I'm going to cut a strip of this really adorable Easter chevron fabric, which I've had for years, into a strip and tie it around the bunny's neck. I just used my scissors to give me a starting point and then ripped the rest of the strip off. I wanted the edges to be a bit fringed, so once it's ripped, you can remove the threads until the fabric is as frayed as you like. I'm just attempting to tie the fabric strip around his neck into a little shoestring bow. And after not getting it the first time, I'm going to give it another try. Because if at first you don't succeed, try again, right? And I find it kind of comical how the simplest things give me the most trouble. I could probably build a house that would withstand a hurricane, but don't ask me to put a bow on it. Once I finally get it tied just right, I use a little hot glue to make sure it ain't going nowhere. And then I trim and dovetail my ends. And again, it never hurts to give it just a little bit more hot glue. It's finally time to put the bunny on the tray. And it looks as though hot glue has now replaced Mod Podge as the star of the show. I'll just trim the edges of those flowers off, and then we can put our decal on. I love my silhouette cameo. In fact, before I started my YouTube channel, I used it nearly every day. So I give it regular maintenance and take great care of it. One of the things that I do to maintain it is I always cover my mat as soon as I'm done using it. That keeps it from getting dirt and dust, cat hair, cracker crumbs, and fairy dust all over it. I also clean my mats as many times as I can before replacing them. But again, that'll be in another upcoming video. Another tip I have for you is to use a paper cutter to cut a straight line across the vinyl. It leaves a nice even line that makes it really easy to line up on the mat when you use it again. My only trouble with this is being able to see the bottom of my design in order to know where to cut. Then I take my homemade pen to weed my design. It's just a mechanical pencil with all the lead taken out of it and a straight pen put in instead. Now, I wanted my decal to be something different other than the typical Welcome Spring or Happy Easter, and plus I wanted to incorporate the fact that the bunny was decoupaged with sheet music. So I came up with the saying, "Spring makes my heart sing." Now, the words needed to be curved to fit around the top of the tray, but in order to save on vinyl, I just arranged the words on the mat in the design software so that it went across the whole page, and I can later arrange them separately when I apply them. I'm just full of tips for you today, and this one is regarding the weeding process. Some people use jars or other kinds of containers to put their weed scraps into, but I use an empty K-cup pod. I simply cut an X-shaped slit in the bottom of it with my razor knife, and my pen fits in it perfectly and comes out clean of scraps every time. Best of all, there's nothing to clean up. You just throw it away when you're done with it. And since you're repurposing an item that would otherwise just go in the trash, you can't beat that. By the way, the only reason you see me struggling to weed this is because I can't see the cut lines. I sure need better lighting in the fairy garden. Yeah, that's it. It's the lighting, not my eyesight. Once I have my decal weeded, I get out my clear contact transfer paper. To save money, I reuse this stuff until it's no longer tacky enough to pick up the vinyl. I keep it in a plastic sheet protector, and the used pieces are on one side, brand new pieces are on the other. And I don't trim my transfer paper down to the size of my design either. That's a waste of time, a waste of materials, and time and materials cost money. I do admit that when using used contact paper as transfer tape, I find it easier to flip it over when I'm peeling it. I use my scraper to press kinda hard and then pull the paper and peel as I go. And wouldn't you know it, this time I pressed so hard, I tore the paper. But that's okay. I just turned it around and started from another corner. Now, if you still have some paper stuck to your vinyl, that's an easy fix too. Just grab your pen and carefully slip it in between the paper and the vinyl, and it'll peel right off. If you don't have a pen and the tip of your weeding tool is too dull to do this, you can always use a safety pin or a straight pin. I wish I could have given you a closer look to see what I was doing, but this camera is really old and it doesn't focus very well, as if you couldn't tell. But I do have a better camera now, so after a couple more videos that I had to film with this one, the film quality will be improved greatly. As for the jokes, I can't promise anything, but I'll try. But let's say, for an instant, that you did find my jokes funny. Well, then you're going to find this part hilarious. I'm going to try and put a stand on my tray because I'd rather it sit on a table or mantle than hang on the wall. Putting an easel on it sounds simple enough, right? Well, hang on there just a minute. Let's not forget who's driving this cuckoo caboose. 'Cause for the life of me, I just couldn't get this thing figured out. It sounded so simple at first. Just take an easel off an old picture frame and glue it on there, right? Wrong. That was fail number 1. And you'll see why here in just a minute. The part of the hinge on the easel was so small that I had to put a piece of tape down to give it more of a bonding surface. That seemed to work out fine until I went to stand it up. I realized I glued the easel on the wrong angle. And in hindsight, all I would have had to do was cut the pointed end of the easel into a straight line. But at the time being, it made more sense for me to remove the whole easel and try to glue it on at a different angle. Fail number 2. So here I think I have my angle correct. Finally. I'm gonna hold it down with a piece of tape and then check it again. And when I'm sure that's the answer to all my problems, I'm gonna glue that sucker down with some hot glue. And that's it. Now it should stand up correctly, right? Wah, wah. So I decided to remove the entire picture frame easel and go another route. I turned to my old faithful foam core board. In order to make an easel out of it, I scored a line at the top to give it a hinge to connect to my tray. Now, I swear y'all, I'm really not stupid. But for some reason, I just didn't see the similarities between the easel that I had just taken off and the one I was about to put on. I put some tape across the top of the hinge to keep it from tearing apart. Trim down the sides, and then I'm going to tape it to my tray. I'll test it first and then go in with some hot glue to secure it down. Since the bottom of the easel is flat, this should be the answer to all my problems, right? Wrong. And that makes fail number 4. This time it was the hinge on the easel that wouldn't stay put. But was the hinge the part I fixed? Nope. I tried cutting it at an angle. At this point, I seriously started pulling my own hair out. But when you're old like me, and your hair's already thin, you realize it's probably best to just CTF down and have a woosah moment. Once I realized that the problem lay within the hinge and not the stand itself, I pretty much figured out how to fix it. But since everything else had gone wrong so far, I figured I'd better try it with tape first. But since I'd already cut the easel at an angle, now it was standing crooked again. So I just went back in, straightened it up with my scissors, and tested it with the tape again. Later on, I went back in and replaced that tape with some satin ribbon, but boy was I glad to be done with that. The last thing I need to do for this project is make a bow for the top of the tray. So again, I'm just going to rip some of that Easter fabric, as well as some other Easter fabric I've had on hand for quite a while, and cut up a few pieces of ribbon. I cut them all approximately the same length. Then I'm just going to stack them randomly on top of each other and tie them all together in the middle with a piece of jute twine. Once they're securely tied together and I fluff my bow out, I'm going to go around the center of it with another piece of ribbon and glue that in place around the back rather than tie it. All that's left now is to trim up the loose ends and glue it to the top of my tray. Although it may have been a little frustrating at times, I absolutely love how this came out. Here's the final reveal. And now, as always, I want you to tell me, do you think the whole project was a mishap? Or did I manage to make a little magic? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're down there, I'd love it if you became part of the Pixie Party by clicking subscribe and ring my bell so you'll know every time I upload a video. And with all that being said, I'll leave you with this. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Oh, and just for the record, those magazines really are mine, and I'd never hurt another living being. Thanks so much for watching, and always remember that all of me loves all of you.